Good morning. We've got great guests again today. Brian Levy with Manchester Care Homes, and we've got Brian Harmon, who is a physical therapist in home care or home health in Dallas.
Right.
And so we've got a great show today. We are talking about vetting employees, how important it is to vet people that are going into your home. So, what better people to talk about this is Brian and Brian.
Got the band back together.
We've got the band back together.
Right.
You all are so great. And, I like to talk about personal experiences on the show. And I had a great great aunt. She lived in McKinney, lived to be 102. And she was a very active member of her church. In fact, she had no children. She was my grandfather's great aunt. And so when she was going to pass, she was leaving her house to the church. So the church recommended these private caregivers for my aunt, and they were going to take care of her. I think they took, $10 an hour back then. I don't remember. But anyway, these three ladies from the church, wonderful ladies, were going to take great care of Auntie. So a couple days before she died, my husband and I made a visit out to the house to say goodbye, and they were having an estate sale. They were selling her things, and this particular woman came to Texas in a covered wagon. I used to love to hear her stories. Everything in her house was old. So I questioned, hey guys, she hasn't even passed yet and you're having an estate sale. Oh, this is just for family. Family wanted some special things. So fast forward, long story short, they stole probably 75% of the contents of her home. And, I was just a great, great niece. There was not a whole lot I could do, but my grandparents, these elderly cousins, trusted these women because they were church members.
Right.
So it's so important to properly vet the people to come into your home, not just your housekeeper, but your termite inspector. We all, as business owners, have vetting processes. So we're talking today about just vetting, and there's a big risk for hiring people independently and privately. So we're going to talk about a lot of people here. Our fees for service, 20 an hour, 25 an hour. Some of our competitors charge a little lower, 18 an hour. Some charge a lot higher, 35 an hour. So there are reasons behind the agency charging more than you would for a private person. So we're going to talk about that. There are a lot of things that go on behind the scenes, and people think as business owners, we just make so much money. We're laughing all the way to the bank.
Huge margins.
Yeah. Yes, and it is there's a lot of money we spend administrative wise to keep the safest people in a home. So let's talk today. Let's talk about Craigslist. A lot of people say, you know what, Joe, you're just way too expensive for me. I found a private person on the internet, and I say, stop, hold on. So let's talk about Craigslist. Brian, what are your thoughts on hiring privately through Craigslist?
So I had personal experience with this as well. We had a couple lovely ladies who worked with my grandmother, and we had a opposite experience than what you had. They were wonderful. They were like her best friends, and so they were just private people from a church. So it can work, but the risks are pretty extreme. I've also seen where we've had personally. I walked in with a client that I was working with, showed up to do my therapy visit with her, and the private caregivers there with her 2 kids. And so that kind of stuff you do see. I think at least if you go through an agency where there's some vetting taking place, there's background checks, those kind of things, and there's some accountability from the company level, that's helpful. The other part of it is that may not be known out there is that once you start to get to, I think the number is $2,100. If you spend, so let's say I find a private duty caregiver on Craigslist, excuse me, and I spend $2,100 on that private duty person, then all of a sudden the IRS now deems me as an employer. And so now I have to go and get an employee identification number or employer identification number and file for payroll taxes. I have to have now workers' comp, all these things. So there's all these other things that you're opening yourself up to because we try to go maybe a little bit of a cheaper route through Craigslist or Family Friend or whatever, that some of the laws may not be fully understood from the client's perspective.
Mm-hmm. And, and I don't know, Brian, if this is your case too. We work with a lot of the wealthier clientele in Dallas-Fort Worth, and a lot of adult children have a hard time with writing that check, and they see that as their inheritance.
Yep.
And so what I try to say is to families and adult children is this is that catastrophic time that your parents have saved for.
Right.
This is the rainy day.
This is the rainy.
it.
This
Yeah.
is what the rainy day fund is for, and so really, even though you might be spending $2 or $3 more per hour, you have got things like background checks. We do background checks. We're doing drug screening. We're doing education. We're doing training on how to properly turn and lift. All these things we're doing to keep that client safe and
Sure.
healthy and independent.
As with anything, you get what you pay for. And when you find someone on Craigslist, and you've seen the ads before from competitors of ours saying, we have an engagement tonight, here's the care plan, here's the address, or here's the general area of town, who can do it for this amount of money? There's no training, there's no background check. How do you know this person? And and I tell people who call us and say, well, you're a little high. I think we're going to go the private route. You get what you pay for. And when you have a caregiver sitting in the kitchen on their phone looking for a job, they're not focused on their job, what they're doing right then. And I got to tell you, I'm real proud of our staff. They're not looking for a job. They're happy. They enjoy working for us. They recruit for us. We pay 80% of our health benefits for our staff. That's unheard of in the business. We pay them well. We treat them well. We offer no interest loans. So they become part of the family. And, there's also, you talked about background checks and all the other benefits. There's redundancy. So when the caregiver calls at 5 a.m. and the kid's sick or they have a flat tire, we have over 120 caregivers on staff that we can roll into an engagement last minute. That's one of the benefits.
And there are a lot of things, these private caregivers, and what I share with families too, when we're working in a home, it's different than working in a hospital or in a senior living community. You don't have any supervision there. Right. And so I tell our staff, when you go into a home, pretend you're in a hospital. Imagine
cameras everywhere.
Cameras everywhere. You've got a supervisor a few feet away. Those walls, you are in a hospital setting. But when you get into a home, you see the sofa. You got a great movie. They're about to watch The Sound of Music. Yeah. There are dishes in the sink, but I love this part and I love this song. And you forget that you're working. And I've been guilty of that too. I've been in a home, and there was a client before I started Acappella. I did private duty every Saturday for like 6 months. It was a wonderful client, and we were trying to pay bills. And we had a system. We watched 3 movies over the shift, and he loved movies. And so we had our little routine. And the house manager came in one day and was like, boy, this is almost better than, this is better than working. You get paid and you get a triple feature. So it reminded me, what, I am working, and, oops, let me put my nurse hat back on.
Like you said, when you serve the rich and famous and you get to do really nice things with your clients. I mean, we had a caregiver who went to a gentleman's ranch on his private jet every weekend. Yeah. Well, even though you're his companion and you're his caregiver, you still don't take the front seat. You sit where, it's like you're not on vacation,
But it's easy to forget.
It's easy to roll into that. And you get, like we talked about earlier, our caregivers become really close with our clients. I mean, we've had clients leave their cars to caregivers. We had a gentleman, a very high-profile gentleman, who was dying, and the last person that he asked to see was the caregiver.
Oh, wow.
Aww,
And
that's
they
sweet.
called and they were like, send him over. And that was it. It was the family left, and he went in and spent time with him.
Well,
They become so close because there's that trust factor, and that, I guarantee you, they tell things to our caregivers they don't tell to their family,
Well, and the reality is we're busier. Women work where they didn't 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Families, we've got kids involved with things, and the adult children, we are pulled and stretched so thin. And I know as the daughter of parents that were aging and both with different types of dementia, it was very hard to juggle. And I felt like I was, just not providing the care I needed to my own family,
Sure.
and so it's a struggle. And so
Right.
that caregiver does become that lifeline, but in homes, I've read that a lot of these private caregivers, there have been lots of stories on the news where the caregivers talk the patient into giving all everything, changing the will and giving everything to the caregiver.
Mhm.
And then what do? The family's blindsided, and legally, if it's a
If
private
she's of sound
person,
mind,
yes, they
there's-
can make those.
Yeah.
Where with an agency, we're going to do those soup visits. We're going to make sure, remind that caregiver that they are a staff member, that they're not family. They want to love them like family,
Right.
but have those boundaries,
Along the lines of your story, we had an engagement where we have a woman that we care for, and she met two nurses at a rehab or somewhere where she was. She went home and wanted to hire both of them directly. Knew exactly what she wanted to pay them, and so she ran payroll through us. We did background checks. So basically, we hired those two caregivers
Yeah.
to be her live-in. This woman was very wealthy, but wanted it on the
Wow.
up and up, and we worked with her bank to do it right. And so, we always say we play well with others. If you have your favorite family caregiver and you want supplemental staff on nights or weekends or whenever she can't be there, we can fill in.
Sure.
But just do it right.
Yeah.
They don't cut corners.
Well, and with family living out of town, so many, I think 30% of adult children live out of state
Yeah.
from their parents. So, we have cases too where if the carpet needs to be cleaned or the washing machine needs to be repaired or the yard needs to be done, we are helping to supervise that too,
Right.
the big picture of things. So let's talk about, with a private person, what about health risk? What if that private person gets sick? So what is that family going to do? That's where working with agencies, we can be that backup. If somebody's sick, especially with COVID, and the scare of COVID, we have a number of caregivers that can fill in.
And you have protocols
And we
that
have protocols.
private
and
individuals
Training,
may not.
right.
You're exactly right. Right.
We talked. We changed our process a little bit. Instead of doing 4-hour minimums, we moved it to 20-hour-a-week minimum. So our caregivers aren't going, to 3 different engagements and then work in the care homes at night. They are either with one family for 40 hours or multiple engagements, 20 and 20. So we're protecting our staff and we're protecting clients. And quite frankly, we've kind of fired a few clients that just wanted the 4-hour a week, twice a week kind of thing. And, you've got to be COVID ready,
You do. And it's hard, for families to understand. They may, like we had a call today, they wanted 4 hours, but 2 in the morning and 2 at night.
Right.
And I tried to explain, our staff has bills to pay and we have to be considerate of that. They are professionals and they can't live on, you can't even pay your electric bill, working 2 hours.
But
So-
also, you don't want a revolving door. So
Right.
if somebody comes in the morning, where are they going to be all day before they get back to your house that night? We're in two houses or just one. And we want to be respectful to our staff. We also want to be respectful to the clients that haven't thought about that,
And Brian, I know with Medicare Home Health, and you go out and you train private caregivers, agency caregivers. Tell me your thoughts on why do you feel going with an agency in that Medicare setting and that coordination of care is so important?
So there's a lot there. I would say number one is the consistency. So, when we're working with, for instance, like Brian's company, we train a lot of the caregivers. We train a lot of like the house managers, the supervisors, so that there is a consistency in certain processes, transfers or whatever that can get relayed downstream to those. Working with Brian's company, we see just overall a better consistency of care versus some of the other ones that we've tried to do before, or even with some of the private individuals. And with the private individuals, and we do have some that have the private ones because, they only need an hour here or an hour there, and that doesn't it's not the right client for like an agency, because it's hard to make that work for the caregivers and the agency. And so we do have a few that we work pretty closely with, but again, it's consistency with them. But I'll tell you, one of the things that we run into is what happens when Sally goes on vacation. Sally being the caregiver, right? Now all of a sudden, me, because I've connected them with this private individual, now I'm having to hustle and try to find another private individual that I trust to kind of go out there. So I prefer in large cases to use the agencies, just because I know there's that consistency, and there's always somebody I can call too. There's supervisory visits, all that kind of stuff,
which is so important for continuity of care, because Brian coming in 2 hours a week, we can mirror what he's showing our caregivers to do and do it properly, and then we can just continue to do it that way.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about the dangers of hiring an independent private person. So lots of things, and I did some research on this. Physical abuse. You don't have anybody watching and supervising what that caregiver is doing. And we took on a patient that had a private caregiver, and we took over. This patient wound up just getting bruises all the time. And the family, they never had an explanation on how mom kept having these bruises.
Right.
We have somebody I was talking to the other day. Her grandmother has a private caregiver in New York City. Family is adamant. They go privately. It's cheaper. And she's like, Joe, I cannot count the number of times that my grandmother has been walking the streets of Manhattan and the caregiver had no idea. She was gone, got in the elevator, went downstairs, walked down, because people with dementia, I mean, they can fool you. That that short-term memory loss.
They mask it pretty well.
Yeah,
They're
can.
alert. They can talk the talk. They can talk about the past and fool you. Yeah.
Another is sexual abuse. We took over a client. There was a private caregiver that was. They found this gentleman kept going to the bank and taking money out. And she would take him to get withdrawals. It was always $100, like 3 days a week. Well, they put some cameras in, hidden cameras, and the private caregiver was offering services to the patient, and he would pay her afterwards. And and so that kind of stuff goes on.
Yeah. We always tell the caregivers, there are cameras whether you can see them or not. So just know you're being filmed.
I know.
Yeah.
So there's just so much. Okay, and then another emotional abuse, saying, you know what, I've heard of private people saying, Mrs. Jones would not be alive if it weren't for me, or I am Mrs. Jones' best friend.
Right.
And a lot of times they will turn families against the patient, against the families. Have you all seen anything like this? Or
I haven't
Casey
personally.
Kasem is a great example. I mean, that whole scenario,
yes.
that was, I think, his wife or whoever, but that's a good example of, you get them on your side and it's over.
I know.
They change the will, they give you your money. There's no recourse.
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
it is elder abuse.
I know it is. I know Mickey Mantle. I think he had that situation too, with a caregiver just taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from him. And
that's part of getting to know your staff as an agency when you interview them, and it's not just A, B, C, D, here's the interview, but it's put the papers aside and really get to know, in as much as you can in an hour or so, personality. Why are you a caregiver? Why are you doing this? Training, background, where have you worked? Everyone's going to give references, but they're going to give a cousin, a boss, and somebody that they gave $20 to.
Well, and that's a good one just to talk about. I know we've had people, Joe, you've got to get to the office. Mary Poppins just walked through the door. And I'm always like, okay, if it's Mary Poppins, she's too good to be true.
Right.
So find out, this particular Mary Poppins worked for a Susie Smith for 19 years. well, what did she do for Susie Smith? And you're right. Is Susie Smith a relative? How can we really verify employment? So it's so important. Just because they say, oh, I took care of my grandmother for 9 years, and that is not enough. And people, oh, you know what? I just have such a love for seniors, and I've taken care of everybody in my family.
It's the Lord's calling.
Yes.
And church led me here.
Yes.
And, we heard it all.
Yeah, we have
Right,
heard it all.
right.
And that is, they know the things to say
Sure.
that you want to hear, but you've got to remember it's a job, it's a position, they are caring for someone you love so much. So you've got to dig deeper.
Right.
And this
you
is
know?
a very vulnerable time in their life for them, and so it's even more important to make sure that proper due diligence is done on whoever's coming into your home. Training is one of those big things. If there's not, these private duty people, they're not trained on necessarily infection control. They're not trained on, the COVID stuff. They're not trained on transfers. They're not trained on any of those kind of things. And so we're trusting them to come in because they're sweet and they're lovely, and we're trusting them to come in and take care of mom and dad. They're not even trained on. You guys see this in your care homes, and I'm sure you do too with private duty. The memory care aspects of things, right? There's a whole training that needs to be done on how do you respond, how do you get patients or clients with dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever the other symptoms or causes are. How do you get them to comply with certain things? How do you talk to them? How do you get them to eat, to shower, those kind of things, without bullying them into it? And so there's training that has to happen, and we don't know off of Craigslist if you actually gone through dementia care training before or not.
Right, and even if they have worked in an AL or an
Right.
IL, who trained you there? How long were you there? What did you do there?
Right.
And then how's that going to transfer over
Right.
to private duty or care home?
That's right.
So it's not all, it's somewhat related,
Yeah.
but as Dean always likes to say, is it the Manchester way?
Right.
Is it the Cambridge way?
Right.
Is it the way we want it done?
Right.
So, we'd rather train them the way we want it done.
Yeah.
Training is vital. Yeah.
And seniors are so vulnerable and so isolated, and people know that they can take advantage of seniors.
Sure.
So there are, just look out for those people that seem too good to be true. They probably are. Neglect. That's another danger. Just because, like we say, Susie had 10 years experience caring for both sets of grandparents. Does she really know how to spot the beginning of a bed sore?
Right.
Is she brushing the patient's teeth and really watching what's going on? Is she making sure she's getting to the doctor? Is she getting her hair done? Just those little things that allow people to
Yep.
feel
That's
special.
a great reason. I always like to have redundancy, and I don't ever want to have one caregiver on an engagement. First of all, multiple people need to be trained and familiar with the engagement, but also it's checks and balances, Have maybe every other day where somebody can come in and take a look at what happened yesterday and see if there's some consistency. So that's real important.
And it reminds me, with these private caregivers, when we have taken over sometimes with a family, with a patient that had round-the-clock care, and they were private and they were fighting and bickering, what I found as an agency owner, I never tolerate a queen bee. Like, say somebody has 4 caregivers, 2 for during the day, Monday through Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There should be a point person, but nobody is the boss of the other caregivers. We are the supervisors. Because I found that so many times with private caregivers. And you can't allow one person to have so much weight. They are a team. There's no I in team. And I don't know if you've seen that too, or you've seen that, Brian, too.
I have, and we have had engagements where they're 24/7, and we have multiple caregivers, and one of them's like, "Well, I'm closest with so and so.
Right.
He loves me the best. He gave me $100 tip last night," which we don't accept tips, by the
Right,
way.
right.
Goes right back to the family. And that's the other thing is I love it when families are involved. They're another set of eyes. They know their family, their loved ones better than anybody. And they pick up on cues of things that aren't
Right.
going well.
Right.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
It is. And then medical neglect. When somebody doesn't have that proper oversight, maybe they don't know, it could be something as simple as signs that somebody is gaining weight, or they've got heart disease and they've got a lot of fluid and they just.
The pills are still in the pill box.
Yeah.
Well, they definitely didn't take them, so
Right.
what happened?
Right. So it's all those things. The other danger, of course, theft and financial exploitation. I always share this story. We had a patient that we took care of. Prior to that, she was independent. She was losing, memory, having some memory issues. She wanted to live independently. The family was like, fine. And so they did it as long as they could. The tipping point was when Toys for Tots called, not Toys for Toys for Toddlers called, not Toys for Tots. The Toys for Tots is legitimate nonprofit.
Yeah.
Toys for Toddlers. So she wound up giving this Toys for Toddlers $3,000 over the phone. And it is very easy with hearing loss and, memory issues, cognitive changes, to hear, you don't really hear and you want to help, and somebody sounds so nice on the phone, and, oh, honey, I was just giving them money to give toys to the kids. So, people take advantage of the elderly.
They do.
And so, they can be financially exploited. So we just want to make sure we're doing everything we can to prevent that.
Right. That's the difference between a trained caregiver that works for an agency and someone off Craigslist.
Yeah.
They know to keep an eye out for that kind of stuff and report it. Call the family, call management. Let people know.
So let me ask you, Brian, we talked about drug screening. I know at Acappella we have nurses. We take care of a lot of hospice patients.
Right.
And we do what's called RN delegation. So we are handling, even our caregivers are handling morphine, lorazepam, medicines that, the average person can get addicted to,
Right.
So what do you do if one of your staff members is accused of stealing medication?
So we are, like Acappella, we're non-medical. So we're not administering medicine. We do stern background checks, personality, that kind of stuff. We do drug screening on a spot-by-spot basis. We don't do all of them. But we're aware, and we're very in touch with our staff to know if there's a red flag, we'll drug screen them right away.
Well, I heard about a group home, and this was pretty recently. It was before COVID, but there was a hospice nurse that was called out to this group home, and one of her patients was declining. Well, the 3 caregivers at the group home were all high as kites, and they had gotten into the liquid morphine. And it's not funny, but
it can happen.
It can happen. And this was one of those unlicensed, just hire whoever can be there, So you have to have strict rules.
Sure. And in the care homes at Manchester, we have not only we have cameras, but we have a computer system, AccuFlow. All the meds are triple checked. There's a nurse, there's a doctor. When you're in a private home and there's morphine or these street drugs that are worth a lot of money sitting around, there's really needs to be checks and balances. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's
Totally.
it's worth money.
Yep.
Street money.
I know.
Yeah.
So, Brian, any other comments that you have to share?
Yeah, so we actually had a case several years ago where we had a nurse who was helping the family members to remove medications, like their old expired medications. Like, we don't want those things in the house anymore, right? Because mom or dad's going to take them. And so she was helping the daughter to remove certain meds, and ended up that she took some of the morphine, which was an active med. And so anyway, so the daughter ends up calling me saying, hey, I had this nurse try to remove some of these meds. I asked her to do so, but now I've noticed that my dad's narcotics are missing. So
wow.
we, when it comes to nursing, like, there's license issues, right? And so because I was running an agency back then, I had to inform the nursing board, and I had to inform the nurse. I had to inform there's a local number I had to call as well, per our license agreement. And so they had to come out and do a whole investigation on this particular nurse, and ultimately she lost her job because it was one of those things where you just can't. It's
Just
too
take it.
it's too much of a liability,
Yeah.
So we've seen that.
I think the main takeaway really is where's your staff coming from? And we're fortunate enough to have staff that recruit from family or church or whatever, and they can quote unquote vouch for whoever they're bringing in. But get to know your staff, really, really get to know them. And we know our staff, we know their kids, we know their spouses. Some of our staff have been with us upwards of 10 years.
Yeah.
It's just real important.
And it's so important for those supervisory visits. I tell families, I know what we like to pop in. Some want to know what day and what time we're popping in, but we never let the staff know because they are like in a hospital. We're that supervisor, and we need to oversee what's going on. So anyway, it's so important to find the right people, do that proper vetting, and it's just going to be ultimately better care and a better overall experience.
Sure, that's right.
So thank you so much. If anybody has questions on Manchester Homes, Cambridge Caregivers, how can they get in touch with you, Brian?
Yeah, I'm real easy to reach. Telephone number 214-649-9922. CambridgeCaregivers.com, ManchesterLiving.com. Give me a shout.
And what about you, Brian, for if anybody needs Medicare home health, physical therapy?
You can reach me on my cell phone, 321-271-4052. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn.
Thank you guys so much.
How do
Have
we
a good
reach you,
week.
Joe?
You can reach me anytime at our office, 214-866-0085. Call Acappella. We are here to serve. So thank you so much. Y'all have a great day.
Thanks for having us,
All
Joe.
right, bye.